Okay, so hello everyone. Again, I would like to thank Kenyon College and the Center for Innovative Pedagogy for hosting my presentation today. I'm Sophia Zevgoli. I'm assistant professor at the Department of English and Modern Languages and also assistant director at the Institute for Hellenic Culture and the Liberal Arts at DRI, the American College of Greece. Today, I will argue in favor of purposefully integrating culture teaching in our classes. I will also argue that culture teaching involves much more than sharing a bunch of cultural facts about a country and its people. And I will describe a few types of cultural techniques and practices used in my modern Greek language classes to discuss how they may support students in embracing diversity and developing an inclusive mind. Let me start with why culture teaching and how it relates to diversity. Due to global immigration and the process of globalization, diversity is on the rise worldwide. This has led to a growing acknowledgement and appreciation of diversity in all its forms, that is, ethnic, racial, linguistic, and religious. Diversity in all these forms is also increasing in schools, colleges, and universities. Diversity poses challenges as well as opportunities for educational institutions, educators, and students alike. The need for multicultural education is more pressing than ever, as this form of education may reduce the challenges associated with diversity while maximizing its educational opportunities and potential. Instructors need to be able to work effectively with students from diverse racial, ethnic, cultural, etc. groups, and the same holds for students, who also need to be able to work productively and harmoniously with instructors and classmates from different backgrounds. The acknowledgement of this need has led to a renewed interest in the development of intercultural competence. This is a term that has received many definitions, but here is a very comprehensive definition of intercultural competence. So it is a combination of attitudes, knowledge, understanding, and skills which enable one to understand and respect people, respond appropriately, effectively, and respectfully, establish positive and constructive relationships with people, and understand oneself. A vehicle for the development of intercultural competence is teaching culture. And an ideal setting for teaching culture, but not the only one, is the language classroom, given that culture and language are closely intertwined. What is meant by culture here is what you see in the PowerPoint slide. In other words, culture is the things that are shared by members of a community, such as social habits and conventions, rules of etiquette, for example, polite behavior, daily life, but also cultural values and beliefs, etc. Although the importance of culture teaching has been widely demonstrated in the literature, the inextricable relation between language and culture has led to two misconceptions. The first is that culture teaching amounts to information about the country or countries where a language is spoken. This type of information is indeed part of culture teaching. So, accumulating such information might indeed help a learner of a second or foreign language become more knowledgeable about certain aspects of the target culture. But if culture teaching is limited to just this, then the learner will not necessarily develop an understanding of how members of that particular culture view the world, perceive themselves in an ever-changing world, what certain words or expressions mean in cultural terms, and how all this is similar to or different from what they themselves experience as members of their home culture. The second misconception is that by teaching language, one automatically teaches culture. Language learners may indeed pick up certain cultural clues without explicit instruction, especially in a second language learning setting. For example, students learning Greek in Greece will at some point pick up that in formal situations, Greeks use the you plural form of verbs and pronouns, the so-called plural of politeness, while in informal situations, they use the singular form of these words, which happens in other languages as well. The question is what qualifies as a formal situation and what as an informal situation in the Greek way of life. A straightforward formal situation is, for example, when you interact with a person who ranks higher than you, or who is older than you, or whom you do not know. So hierarchy, familiarity with people with whom you are interacting, and also age difference between people are generally considered important in determining the appropriate way to address them. Taking all these factors into account then, would you use the plural of politeness to attract the attention of a stranger who had dropped something in the street if this person were approximately the same age as you? So this is a person you do not know, but with the same age as you. Would you use the plural of politeness? And if not, to what age groups would you use the singular forms in such a context? Given that these norms vary from one society or culture to another, second or foreign language learners need to be explicitly guided through the norms that apply in a particular society, in a particular culture. Interculturally competent users of a language are those who are aware of the relevant cultural dimensions and make choices that are culturally and socially appropriate. So I argue here that although language learners may indeed pick up certain cultural clues without explicit instruction, in order for them to become interculturally competent, they need to be taught culture explicitly. Explicit culture teaching is viewed here as an umbrella term, encompassing various techniques and activities that can be implemented in a language classroom and beyond. Instead of simply receiving information about aspects of another culture, through these activities, learners are encouraged to take a deeper view toward culture, reflect on cultural facts, make comparisons and contrasts between different cultures, and even negotiate cultural differences. This is done through exploration, explanation, and immersive experiences, as the title of this presentation indicates. Let me now share with you a few things about the courses in which these practices are employed. These are term-long courses or shorter, tailored modern Greek classes designed for study abroad students who are beginners in modern Greek. Greek is taught as a second language, that is in a context where the target language is spoken as a first language. In a language classroom, the teaching of semantic and syntactic aspects of words or phrases should be also complemented with the cultural meaning of these items. An example has been already provided. Earlier, I discussed the importance of teaching students when the plural of politeness is appropriate. Another relevant example is diminutives. Greeks use a lot of diminutive forms. For instance, Greeks often say, I'm eating a small apple, milaraki, while they might be eating one huge apple. Or they might say, could I ask you for a little water, neraki, when they might actually mean a whole bottle or jug of water. Learners of Greek need to be explicitly taught why Greeks use so many diminutives in their everyday speech, or what kind of hidden messages they communicate when using such forms. As we all know, the primary function of diminutives is to express the idea of little or small. However, students need to be trained to not always interpret diminutives literally. In Greek, diminutives are often used with names for people to indicate affection, tenderness, and positive emotions. Interestingly, diminutive forms of words denoting objects and not people are also common, and these are used to express closeness and solidarity. When you talk to someone who is close to you, the moment you use a diminutive of a word denoting an object, Provided that you use the right intonation, of course, you express solidarity. As such, diminutive forms denote dear little things that people feeling very close to each other share or intend to share. In order for students to familiarize themselves with such cultural meanings of words, they need to engage in purposeful class activities. For example, they may be presented with dialogues or texts including such forms and asked to explore and discuss the meaning of diminutives in them. They may be also asked to compare the use of diminutive forms and their denotational as well as connotational meaning to those in their own language, in their own culture, to identify similarities and differences. Finally, when asked to produce their own dialogues, either orally through role plays in class or in writing, they may be asked to integrate such forms into their own speech. Classes devoted to unraveling the socio-cultural meaning of certain phrases might also be enriched with experiential learning, so that the particular meaning of these words can be not only understood, but more importantly, experienced. Let me offer an example. A number of my modern Greek classes are devoted to shopping food. And during these classes, apart from relevant vocabulary and expressions, students are provided with information about where Greeks usually buy food. One such place is laiki, meaning a street market, a farmer's market. Indeed, such markets pop up in different neighborhoods once a week. Starting at dawn, benches and counters are assembled and filled with seasonal regional produce such as fruit, vegetables, eggs, flowers, plants, etc. Sellers try to sell their goods by shouting witty one-liners such as "this is not a stall," "this is a boutique," and the like. So one of my classes takes place at a street market close to campus. Often, I invite Greek students from other classes to attend this event. The role of Greek students is to facilitate my students' interactions in authentic communicative situations. They also engage in a group discussion about cultural differences between Greeks and speakers of other languages. As I said earlier, I meet students at a street market close to campus. Students spend some time buying goods, and they are supported in these interactions by the Greek students in case there is a communication breakdown or they have forgotten the word for a particular item they wish to buy. During these brief interactions, usually sellers, once they realize that these are American students, ask them questions such as, where are you from? Which school do you go to? Do you have street markets such as this in your country? Oftentimes, sellers also give students a trick. Students are also asked to observe the communication between the sellers and themselves, and to the extent they can, the interactions between other customers and sellers. The next class is devoted to reflecting on this experience. A class discussion, which is also attended by the Greek students, facilitators at the street market, takes place, and students are asked to identify things that have surprised, intrigued, or puzzled them. One thing that usually emerges is the use of singular forms to them. Before the experiential class, it is explained to students that at grocery stores or supermarkets, when buying food, the interactions are normally formal. So the plural of politeness is used. But the students notice that during the experiential class at the street market, many sellers have used singular to them, and also that many interactions between Greek customers and sellers have been informal. They also notice that in many of these interactions, people have not used thank you or please very often, or at least not as often as an American or British person would have. I asked them why they believe that such interactions were that informal, or whether they thought that the sellers had been too direct. I encouraged them to be frank and honest in the views they share, as I want stereotypes to be explicitly stated. I want the stereotype to have a life or presence, even a short one, because once we can all see it, instead of pretending it's not there, we can do something about it. So a student, or sometimes I myself, if my students are concerned about insulting me, say that Greeks might be less polite than American or British people. At that point, I tell them, okay, let's for a moment assume this is true. How do you then explain the fact that Greeks take extra care to use the politeness plural when this is appropriate? And on the other hand, should we assume that when the plural of politeness is not used in a certain language, the speakers of that particular language are in general less polite? This gets them to think critically about different ways of expressing politeness in different societies and cultures, including their own. A discussion takes place and students come to the conclusion that the fact that they are so much younger than the sellers led the sellers to use singular forms to them. As for the informal forms used to other older customers, students realize that street markets develop into small hubs or communities where especially those sellers who have returning customers often spend some time talking with them, as happened with my students and the sellers, talking with them on various matters. This allows them to develop a type of friendly or social relationship with them, which goes beyond the strictly transactional one. Because then familiarity comes into play, the initial plural of politeness gives way to singular. Let me now turn to the impact activities of this type may have on learners. First of all, learners are very engaged in such activities. Such activities are a nice break from grammar and vocabulary and similar aspects of language. Furthermore, these activities get students to think critically and actively learn about different cultures. Students come to realize that there is so much more to learning a language than learning its grammar or vocabulary, and that learning to operate with cultural efficiency in a variety of sometimes unfamiliar situations is also important. More importantly, language learners start interpreting the host national's behavior through the host cultural lens rather than through their own culture's lens. This leads to a better understanding of their own culture as well, because defining the other often helps define one's own self. Students develop higher levels of empathy and tolerance for ambiguity and are equipped with skills needed to function in a diverse world society and not just in their immediate environment. And precisely because we want to help students become able to function and work in multicultural environments, irrespective of their particular field, activities of this type can be used in many different classes, as they are easily adaptable to a wide variety of educational settings. If there is time after the end of my presentation, I can provide an example where a cultural, for example, activity can be used in a business course. So these are my references. Thank you very much for your attention. If you wish to contact me, these are my contact details.